Welcome to Heartbreak Chronicles. Thomas Gardner set his cell phone on the kitchen counter, the screen still lit. The text message was simple and clear. Tomorrow night, 8 o'clock, usual place. Miss you. The sender was Marcus. It wasn't the first text message of its kind. Over the past 3 months, Thomas has noticed a change. His wife, Sarah, was coming home later and later, always with her cell phone face down, and taking it into the shower. She says it's the stress of work and the new projects that require overtime. As a construction engineer, Thomas understood the unpredictability of the job, but Sarah's changes went beyond simply working. She started wearing different underwear, wearing a new perfume, and practicing her smile in the mirror has changed. 15 years of marriage had allowed Thomas to read the subtlest changes in his wife, just as he could read every line on an architectural drawing. Sarah worked at an advertising agency downtown, where she was in charge of client relationship management. Marcus was a new client she'd picked up 3 months earlier, a so-called art dealer. Now Thomas knows that Marcus is more than a client. Thomas walked over to the living room window and looked out at the manicured lawn. They had lived in this house for 10 years, painted the walls together, planted a garden together, planned for the future together. Sarah used to say it was her haven, the only place she ever really felt safe. Ironically, now the place Thomas felt least safe was this home. Sarah's voice came from upstairs. "Tom, I'm working late again tonight, and I'll probably be back late." "Okay," Thomas responded, his voice so calm that it surprised even him. The sound of the front door closing came, followed by Sarah's car starting. Thomas checked the time, 7:30 p.m. If that text message was true, Sarah was driving to meet Marcus right now. Thomas sat at Sarah's desk, which was where she handled her work at home. The desk was neatly arranged with papers, notebooks, and her favorite pen. He didn't turn anything over, just sat quietly, thinking about what to do next. They met in college 15 years ago. Sarah was studying marketing and Thomas was studying engineering. She was lively and cheerful. He was calm and introverted. She said they were perfect complements to each other, and he thought so too. After graduation, they got married, moved to the city, each got a job, and built a life they thought would last a lifetime. There were no children, not because they didn't want them, but because Sarah always said, "Not yet." First it was time to build a career, then it was time to buy a house, then it was time to save enough money, and there were always reasons to put it off. Thomas had always thought there was plenty of time, that they would eventually have children and become a real family. Now he wondered if maybe Sarah had been preparing for that day, making sure there was nothing stopping her from leaving. Thomas's cell phone rang. It was David, his best friend and work partner. "Tom, are you ready for the project meeting tomorrow?" "Ready," Thomas said, although he hadn't thought about work all day today. "You don't sound quite right. Is everything okay?" David was the kind of guy who could hear the subtle changes in someone's voice, which was one of the things that made him a good engineer. They'd worked together for 7 years, and David had seen Thomas and Sarah at their best and was a regular at their wedding anniversary parties. "I'm fine," Thomas said, but he knew David wouldn't believe it. "Are you sure? I'm here if we need to talk." "I know. Thanks, David." After hanging up, Thomas continued to sit at Sarah's desk. The house was very quiet, with only the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional sound of a car in the distance. This quiet used to make him feel calm, but now it was suffocating him. At 11 p.m., Thomas heard the garage door open. Sarah had returned. He didn't move, continuing to sit in a chair in the living room with an architectural magazine, pretending to read. "Tom," Sarah's voice came from the foyer. "In here." Sarah walked into the living room with a tired look on her face. Her hair was a little disheveled and her lipstick had disappeared, but there was a sparkle in her eyes that Thomas hadn't seen in a long time. "How was work?" Thomas asked, not looking up at her. "Exhausting, but it's going well. We might be able to take this big client." Sarah sat down on the couch and started taking off her heels. "What did you do tonight?" "Read some project information and then watch TV." Thomas flipped through a page of a magazine. "Did you eat?" "Ordered takeout from the office." Sarah stood up. "I'm going to take a shower and then go to bed. There's an important meeting tomorrow." Thomas nodded, still not looking at her. "Okay, good night." Sarah paused for a moment as if she wanted to say something, but ultimately said nothing and turned toward the stairs. Thomas listened as her footsteps disappeared upstairs, then the sound of the bathroom door closing, followed by the sound of water running. He continued to sit in his chair, staring at the architectural drawings in the magazine. But his mind was on something else entirely. He remembered how Sarah had changed 3 months ago. That was when she'd started talking about Marcus, saying he was an interesting client, had a good eye for art, and often took her to painting shows. Thomas thought at the time that this was normal, that Sarah's job was to maintain client relationships and that attending social events was part of the job. But now Thomas realized how much of those work meetings and client dinners were true and how much was a lie. The next morning, Sarah woke up earlier than usual. She was already dressed and putting on her makeup when Thomas was in the kitchen preparing coffee. "Anything important today?" Thomas asked. "Yes, that artwork client is going to make the final decision. If it works out, it will be our firm's biggest contract of the year." Sarah was applying lipstick in front of the mirror, her movements focused. Thomas noticed she'd chosen a dress he'd never seen before, dark blue and tailored to fit. Her hair was carefully styled, and her makeup was more subtle than usual. "Sounds important." "It is." Sarah turned to look at him. "If all goes well, we'll celebrate tonight. I may be back late." "I understand." Thomas handed her a cup of coffee. "Good luck." Sarah took the coffee, her fingers lightly touching Thomas's hand. "Thank you, Tom. You've been very supportive." The words sounded like some kind of goodbye, although Thomas wasn't sure if he should interpret them that way. After Sarah left, Thomas didn't go to work right away. Instead, he sat down at the kitchen table, took out a paper and pen, and began to write something. Not a love letter, not an angry accusation, but a list. First, he listed all the details of Sarah's recent behavioral changes. New clothes, new makeup products, a change in her phone habits, a change in her home time, and even a change in how often she rolled over in her sleep. As an engineer, Thomas is used to thinking precisely and systematically. He then lists the things he needs to verify, whether Sarah is really working overtime, whether Marcus really exists, and how far their relationship has really progressed. Finally, he begins to think about his options. He could question Sarah directly, but she would likely deny it and then become more careful. He could hire a private investigator, but that would make him feel like a voyeur. He could also do nothing and pretend everything is fine until Sarah makes her own decision. But Thomas knows he can't do nothing. 15 years of marriage, 10 years of living together, shouldn't just end quietly. If Sarah wanted to leave, she should at least have the courage to say so. If she wanted to continue the marriage, she needed to end the betrayal. Thomas folded the paper and put it in his wallet. Then he grabbed his toolbox and drove to work. At the construction site, Thomas finds that work helps him forget about his problems at home for a while. Measuring, calculating, and solving technical problems are specific tasks that keep his brain focused on the present time. But as soon as it's time for a break, those thoughts return. What is Sarah doing now? Is she texting Marcus? Has she decided she wants to leave the marriage? At lunchtime, David came over and sat next to Thomas. "You seem distracted today," David says, opening his lunchbox. "Sure, everything's okay." Thomas hesitated. David was his most trusted friend, but talking about marital problems made him feel vulnerable. "Sarah might have someone out there," Thomas finally said, his voice low. David stopped chewing and looked at Thomas. "Are you sure?" "Almost sure." Thomas told David about the text messages, the change in behavior, and the signs. David listened and was silent for a moment. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know. I need more information." "Do you want my help?" Thomas looked at David, a friend he'd worked with for 7 years, an honest, reliable man. "Maybe, but I don't want to get you involved in something like this." "Friends are for times like this," David said. "If you need any help, just say the word." That afternoon, Thomas left work early. Instead of going home, he drove to Sarah's office neighborhood. He parked in a spot where he could see the entrance and exit and waited. At 5:30 p.m., Sarah walked out of the office building. Instead of walking to the parking lot, as she usually did, she walked across the street to the coffee shop. Thomas saw a man waiting for her there, tall, dark-haired, wearing an expensive suit. They embraced, not politely, but as lovers. This was Marcus. Thomas sat in his car and watched them walk into the coffee shop together. He felt a strange calmness, like an engineer seeing his calculations confirmed. Now he had hard evidence instead of guesses and suspicions. He took out his cell phone and snapped a few pictures. Not for legal purposes, since the state they were in was not a fault divorce state, but to remind himself that it was all true. Thomas didn't enter the coffee shop or try to eavesdrop on their conversation. Instead, he drove home and picked up some ingredients on the way. If Sarah was going to celebrate tonight, he should make a special dinner for himself. At home, Thomas prepared a simple but elaborate meal: steak, grilled vegetables, and a bottle of wine. He sets the table and lights candles, just like he and Sarah used to do. At 8 p.m., Thomas's cell phone rang. Sarah texted, "Celebration took longer than expected. We'll be back late tonight. Don't wait up for me." Thomas replies, "Okay, have fun." Then he sat down and enjoyed the dinner he had prepared for himself alone. The steak was grilled just right, the vegetables were properly seasoned, and the red wine tasted better than he remembered. He ate slowly, contemplating the next steps. He wouldn't immediately question Sarah or show any anger or sadness. Instead, he would give her enough rope to hang herself. He would continue to observe, gather information, and formulate a plan. As an engineer, Thomas knows that the strongest buildings need the deepest foundations. If he was going to dismantle the marriage, he needed to make sure it collapsed completely and nothing could rebuild it. At 11:30 p.m., Thomas heard the garage door. He was already in bed, pretending to be asleep. Sarah crept into the bedroom and spent a long time in the bathroom. When she finally lay down on the bed, Thomas could smell her unfamiliar perfume, not the kind she usually used. "Tom," she whispered. Thomas didn't respond, keeping his breathing regular and pretending to be asleep. Sarah lay beside him for a long time, tossing and turning, seemingly unable to sleep. Thomas wondered if she felt guilty or was just planning her next date. The next morning, Thomas woke up early as usual and prepared coffee and breakfast for Sarah. When she came downstairs, he was already sitting at the kitchen table, reading the news. "Good morning," Sarah said, with a strange tension in her voice. "Good morning. How was the celebration last night?" "It was great. We took that contract." Sarah sat down, but didn't touch her coffee. "Tom, we need to talk." Thomas's heart raced, but he kept a calm expression. "About what?" Sarah looked at her hands, avoiding Thomas's gaze. "About us. About our marriage. I think we've become estranged." "Is that so?" Thomas put down the paper and gave his wife his full attention. "I don't feel that way. We don't communicate like we used to. We don't do things together anymore. We live like roommates." Thomas knew this was the classic cheater's script: blame the marriage for the problems and make excuses for his behavior. "So what do you think we should do?" Thomas asked. Sarah finally looked up at him. "I don't know. Maybe we should consider a separation for a while. Give each other some space." Thomas nodded, as if considering an engineering problem. "Is that what you want?" "What I want is for us to both be happy. If we're not happy now," Sarah's voice trails off. "I'm happy," Thomas interrupted. "Or rather, I thought I was happy." Sarah's face reddened. "Tom, I don't want to hurt you. I just think we need some time to think about what we want." "Okay," Thomas said. "If that's what you need, we can discuss a separation. But I have one condition." "What condition?" "Before we make any decisions, we should try to save the marriage. Marriage counseling, vacations together, or anything that will help us reconnect. 15 years of marriage is worth that kind of effort." Sarah looks uncomfortable. "I'm not sure this will work. But are you willing to try? For everything we've ever had." Sarah was silent for a long time. Finally, she nodded. "Okay, we can try." Thomas smiled, his first real smile in months. Not because he believed marriage counseling would save their relationship, but because Sarah had just given him the time he needed to execute his plan. Over the next few days, Thomas began systematically gathering evidence. He installed a GPS tracker on Sarah's car and discovered that she often visited Marcus's apartment during work hours. He looked at phone bills and found extensive call records. He even contacted a private investigator and obtained additional photo and video evidence. Meanwhile, Thomas began investigating Marcus Aldrich. Through internet searches and some clever questioning, he discovers that Marcus is not as successful as he claims to be. His art dealership business was more of a front, and his real source of income was questionable. More importantly, Thomas found Marcus' ex-girlfriends. Through social media and some patient searching, he connects with 3 women who were once in a relationship with Marcus. Their stories were strikingly similar. Marcus specialized in finding successful married women, promising them passion and adventure, and then disappearing after draining them of their emotional and financial resources. One woman in particular, Jennifer, was willing to share her experience. She told Thomas how Marcus convinced her to leave her husband, convinced her they had a future lent her money to invest in his business, and then abandoned her when she lost everything. He's a predator, Jennifer said over the phone. He specializes in finding vulnerable women and then exploiting their loneliness and dissatisfaction. Your wife is traveling the same path I did. Thomas thanked Jennifer for her candor and asked if she would be willing to testify if necessary. Jennifer agreed without hesitation. Armed with this information, Thomas began to formulate his plan. He wasn't just going to end the marriage. He was going to make sure that both Sarah and Marcus paid for their behavior. First, he needed to protect his finances. Thomas consulted with a divorce attorney to find out what state law says about property division. Although their state was a community property state, adultery could affect an alimony award. Thomas began quietly reorganizing their finances. He canceled some joint accounts and moved some of his investments to accounts in his name only. He makes sure that all of his actions are legal, but also makes sure that if Sarah tries to get an unfair share in the divorce, she will find fewer divisible assets than she thought. Meanwhile, Thomas continues to play the role of the husband trying to save the marriage. He attends marriage counseling with Sarah, arranges romantic dates, and even plans a weekend getaway. At every turn, Sarah acted distracted, often checking her cell phone during the dates and giving perfunctory answers in counseling. 2 weeks later, Thomas and Sarah were sitting in marriage counselor Dr. Elizabeth Morrison's office. It's a warm, cozy room with soft lighting and comfy chairs designed to make you feel safe and relaxed. So, Dr. Morrison says, "Tell me what brought you here." Sarah spoke first. She talked about the sense of alienation, about the lack of communication, about feeling like roommates instead of a couple. Her voice was sincere and pained, and if Thomas didn't know the truth, he might have been convinced. When it's Thomas's turn, he talks about the pressures of his job, about his desire to improve his marriage, about his love for Sarah. Every word was true, which made saying it both easier and more painful. "Thomas, how do you feel about the alienation Sarah mentioned?" Dr. Morrison asked. "I recognize that we may not be spending as much time together as we used to," Thomas said. "My work is demanding, and I may be neglecting Sarah's needs. But I'm willing to change. I want to rekindle the spark between us." Sarah looked at him, a certain emotion shining in her eyes that Thomas couldn't decipher. Guilt? Hope? Or just acting? "That's good," Dr. Morrison said. "Marriage takes work on both sides." "Sarah, how do you feel about Thomas's commitment?" "I'm grateful," Sarah said, but her voice lacked conviction. "I'm just not sure it's too late." Over the next few weeks, Thomas and Sarah began what Dr. Morrison recommended as the first step in the process. Morrison suggested reconnection exercises. They scheduled regular date nights, had daily check-in conversations, and even tried cooking together. For Thomas, these activities had a surreal feel. He was trying to save a marriage while knowing it was beyond repair. But it gave him time to observe, time to plan, time to prepare. In the meantime, Sarah continues to see Marcus. She became more cunning, more careful, but Thomas's engineer brain was trained to pay attention to details. She would leave the office at lunchtime and come back smelling like another man's cologne. She'll say she's going shopping on the weekend, but come back without any of her purchases. She would bring her cell phone into the bathroom while she was showering, claiming it was to listen to music. Thomas didn't question these behaviors. Instead, he turned out to be the perfect husband, attentive, supportive, and understanding. He bought Sarah flowers, planned surprises, and even suggested they go on a romantic weekend getaway. "You really don't need to do any of this," Sarah says after a particularly elaborate date night. Thomas took her to the best restaurant in town, followed by a concert. "I want to do it," Thomas says. "I want to show you what you mean to me." Sarah looked like she was about to cry. "Tom, you're a good man. You're a really good person. You sound like you're saying goodbye." "No, I just realize how lucky I am to have you." But Thomas knew it wasn't gratitude. It was guilt. Sarah knew she was hurting him, but she couldn't stop herself. She was caught up in a whirlwind of emotions she couldn't control, or maybe she just didn't want to. That night, Sarah closes her eyes as they make love. Thomas realized she was imagining another person, and the realization stabbed him like a knife. But he doesn't stop, doesn't question, doesn't show any pain. Instead, he was gentle and focused, trying to give her everything she needed. The next morning, Sarah left a note by their coffee cups. Thank you for last night. I love you. But when Thomas sees her rushing off to work, he knows it's another lie. At work, Thomas began to make his real plans. As a construction engineer, he is used to long-term projects and to thinking through every detail. His revenge would not be impulsive or emotional. It would be systematic, thorough, and devastating. By digging deeper, Thomas discovers more of Marcus's secrets. Not only is he an emotional predator, but he's also involved in some questionable financial activities. Thomas finds evidence that Marcus uses fake identities to apply for credit cards, which he then uses to maintain his lavish lifestyle. Thomas gathered all of this evidence, including Marcus' criminal record, records of stolen credit card usage, and testimony from several victims. He compiled this information into a detailed dossier. Meanwhile, Thomas continued to observe Sarah's behavior. He noticed that she began withdrawing cash from their joint account in small amounts, but with increased frequency. She may be providing financial support for Marcus or preparing for her departure. One Friday afternoon, Thomas received a call from a private investigator. The detective tells him that Sarah and Marcus are planning to go to a luxury resort this weekend. Sarah told Thomas she was going to a company training event. "Do you want me to follow them?" The detective asks. "No need," Thomas says. "I already have everything I need." Later that night, Sarah was getting ready to leave with a small suitcase. "Will the training be fun?" Thomas asked, his tone light. "It should be beneficial," Sarah said, avoiding his gaze. "It's all about new strategies for customer relationship management. Sounds important. I hope you learn a lot." Sarah glanced at him as if she wanted to say something, but finally just nodded. "I will. See you Sunday night. Take care on the road." After Sarah left, Thomas began to execute his plan. First, he called Janet, Sarah's boss. "Hi, Janet. This is Tom Gardner, Sarah's husband. I wanted to confirm Sarah's training schedule for this weekend because I want to surprise her." "Training?" Janet sounded confused. "Tom, there isn't any company training this weekend. Sarah took personal leave." "Oh, I must have gotten confused," Thomas said. "Thank you, Janet." Next, Thomas called Sarah's parents. Margaret and Robert had always loved Thomas as their son. "Hi, Margaret, this is Tom. I need to talk to you guys about some things with Sarah." Over the course of an hour-long phone call, Thomas explained the situation to them and provided evidence. Margaret cried and Robert cursed angrily. They were both heartbroken for Thomas and ashamed of their daughter's behavior. "We'll support you in any decision you make, Tom," Robert said. "You're a good person and don't deserve to be treated like this." Thomas then began reaching out to their circle of friends. He didn't spread rumors maliciously, but simply stated the facts and let people make their own judgments. On Saturday morning, Thomas went to the bank and transferred half of the funds from their joint account to his personal account. This was perfectly legal because, as a joint holder of the account, he was entitled to do so. In the afternoon, Thomas contacted a friend at the local police station to provide evidence of Marcus's credit card fraud. The police friend promised to launch an immediate investigation. On Sunday morning, Thomas received an unexpected phone call. It was one of Marcus' former girlfriends, a woman named Victoria. "I heard you were investigating Marcus," Victoria said. "I have some information that may be of interest to you. Marcus isn't just a liar, he's also violent. He threatened me when I tried to leave him." Victoria provided copies of medical records and police reports. Thomas realized that Sarah might be in greater danger than he thought. But Thomas didn't take immediate action. He knew that Sarah needed to see Marcus's true colors for herself, or she might see Thomas's intervention as controlling and jealous. Sunday night, Sarah came home. She looked radiant, but also a little nervous. "How was the training?" Thomas asks. "It was good. Learned a lot," Sarah says quickly. "I'm a little tired and would like to get an early night." "Sure." Thomas watched as she hurried upstairs. The next morning, Thomas checked Sarah's cell phone that she had left at home after she left. She had two phones, one for work. He saw a message from Marcus. "Last night was amazing. Can't wait to be with you forever. Ready to tell your husband." Thomas knew the showdown was coming. That afternoon, Thomas received a call from the police. They had arrested Marcus on charges of credit card fraud and identity theft. While searching his apartment, they found more evidence of the crime. Thomas knows that Sarah will soon find out about Marcus' arrest. He decides this is the perfect time to reveal everything. In the evening, Sarah receives a call from Marcus's attorney. Thomas watched her face go from confusion to shock to panic. What happened? Thomas asked when she hung up. Marcus was arrested, Sarah said, her voice shaking. They're saying it's a fraud charge. Oh, Thomas said, his tone calm. That must have been shocking. Sarah looked at him, skepticism in her eyes. Tom, do you know something? Thomas stood up and walked to his study, pulling out a thick folder. I know everything, Sarah. He placed the folder on the coffee table. It contains photos, videos, hotel receipts, phone records of you and Marcus for the past 4 months. I know every place you've been, every lie you've told. Sarah's face turned pale. Tom, I can explain. There's no need to explain. The facts are clear enough. You chose to betray our marriage for a liar and a criminal. I didn't know he was a criminal. Sarah cried. But you knew he wasn't your client. You knew you were lying. You knew you were hurting me. Thomas's voice remained calm, but every word was as sharp as a knife. Tom, please. I made a mistake. We can get through this. I love you. Thomas shook his head. No, Sarah. That's not what love is. Love is loyalty, honesty, and respect. You show the opposite. He pulled out another document. These are divorce papers. I've already signed them. My attorney will formally serve them on you tomorrow. No. Tom, please give me a chance. I will change. I will go to therapy. I'll do anything. It's too late, Sarah. You made your choice. Now you need to suffer the consequences. Consequences? You mean Marcus getting arrested? Did you do that? I simply provided the police with information I stumbled upon. Marcus' crime was his own, just as your betrayal was your own choice. Thomas walked toward the door. I'll be staying at the hotel tonight. A moving company will come tomorrow to pick up my things. The house will be sold, and the proceeds divided according to the law. Tom, please. Sarah dropped to her knees and grabbed his arm. I know I've hurt you. I know I've ruined everything. But please give me a chance to make it right. Thomas gently removed her hand. Sarah, you're not sorry because you hurt me. You're sorry because you got caught. You're panicking because Marcus was arrested. If he was still out there, you would have continued to lie to me. He opened the door. By the way, your parents know. Your boss knows. Our friends know. The perfect image you've created has crumbled. You ruined my life. Sarah shouted. Thomas turned to give her one last look. No, Sarah. You're the one who ruined your life. I'm just making sure you face the truth. He left, with the sound of Sarah breaking down and crying behind him. 3 months later, the divorce was finalized. Sarah had lost her job. The company couldn't tolerate an executive who had an affair with a criminal. Her social circle abandoned her. Her parents, while still loving her, were deeply disappointed in her. Marcus was sentenced to 5 years in prison. At the trial, more victims come forward to testify. Sarah realizes she is just one of his long list of victims. Thomas moves into a new apartment downtown. Although the divorce has cost him financially, his career remains solid. More importantly, he has regained his self-esteem and inner peace. David and his other true friends supported him. Even some of Sarah's friends contacted him privately to express their sympathy and understanding. One evening, Thomas received a call from an unknown number. It was Sarah, calling from a friend's cell phone. Tom, please listen to me for a minute. Thomas was silent for a moment, then said, Go ahead. I know I don't deserve to beg your forgiveness. I know I ruined everything we had. But I need you to know that I really do regret it. Not because of the consequences, but because I realize what I've lost. You were the best thing that ever happened to me in my life, and I was stupid enough to throw it away. Thank you for telling me that, Sarah. Is there any possibility? Any slightest possibility that we could start over? No, Thomas said calmly. Some things, once broken, cannot be repaired. Trust is one of them. I understand. I just want you to know that I'll spend the rest of my life regretting my choices. I want you to learn from this, Sarah. I hope you become a better person, but it will be a life without me. Goodbye, Tom. Bye, Sarah. Thomas hung up the phone and looked out the window at the city at night. He felt no joy of victory, only a calm relief. Justice had been served, the truth had surfaced, and everyone had faced the consequences of their choices. 6 months later, Thomas meets a structural engineer named Emily at a construction industry event. She is smart, independent, and honest. They begin to date slowly, and Thomas approaches this new relationship cautiously but openly. One day, Emily asks about his past. I was married once, Thomas says. But she chose a different path. I'm sorry, Emily said. That must have been painful. Yes, Thomas admitted. But it taught me what's really important. Honesty, loyalty, trust, these aren't negotiable. They're the foundation of any relationship. Emily took his hand. I totally agree. As they continued to talk, Thomas realized that he really had moved on. The pain of his past had shaped him, but not defined him. He'd chosen not to let betrayal turn him into a bitter man, but into a wiser, stronger one. As for Sarah, Thomas hears about her occasionally. She'd moved to another city, trying to make a fresh start. Supposedly she's in therapy, trying to understand why she made the choices she did. Thomas hoped she would find peace and be able to grow. But that was no longer his concern. He has his own life to live, his own future to build. The lesson of this story is simple. Every choice has consequences. Betrayal destroys not only the relationship, but the betrayer himself. And for the betrayed, the best revenge is not hatred or retaliation, but letting the truth surface, letting justice be served, and then moving on to a better life. In the building of life, trust is the foundation. Once the foundation is destroyed, the entire structure collapses. Thomas learns this and uses this lesson to build a new, stronger future. That's the end of today's story. For more captivating tales, hit subscribe and never miss an episode.